Okay, we're going to sum up Chapter 8, China and the World, East Asian Connections, with some reflections. I want you to think about, why do things change? Change and transformation are constants in human history. It's always happening. Explaining why and how societies change is the historian's most central issue. And so that's really what this course is about, learning about how societies function through human history, through the span of time. And there's disagreement about what is the most important catalyst of change. In the case of China, and it really illustrates the range of factors that drive change that you've just spent this whole week learning about. World historians tend to find contact with strangers to be the primary source of change. That's usually because there's an introduction of some new product or resource or technology. And the history of China and East Asia really helps illustrate that view. But it could be misleading to distinguish between internal and external sources of change. So just some things to keep in mind. Now I'd like to go over your visual sources. Okay, so first, visual source here, Banquet with the Emperor. It's a beautiful picture here. This painting, think about what features the painting contributes to the impression of imperial elegance. Right? Maybe the elaborate place settings or the intricate stools that the participants are sitting on. Obviously, a lot of food on the table. A lot of people attending the banquet. How they're dressed, even. And you can see the emperor is here and positioned alone on one side of the table. Right? So what mood does this painting evoke? Well, despite its importance, attending a banquet with the emperor, it kind of gives off this leisurely informality mood, right? It's just a socializing atmosphere as opposed to getting down to business. But there is some social distinction among the figures in the painting. Let's see if we can figure that out. All right, the emperor is set off from the others with his white robe, right? All of these have different colors on. The participants at the banquet are all dressed in two-part outfits, right? A white garment covered by a richly colored outer garment. It could represent elite status. Even the servants are dressed in single-colored uniforms. Okay. Visual source number 2, a table with the Empress. So this is a little bit different. And how does this painting or this gathering of elite women differ from that of the men? And how might their conversation differ? Well, the women have have musicians seated at the table. Here's playing instruments. Right? And it actually looks like their dress is a little bit more elaborate. Of course, the makeup. And the Empress is not set apart from her guests like the Emperor was. And I bet the conversation is probably still informal, but it's more likely to focus on issues of relevance to probably the elite women. Here's an interesting question. Thinking about this painting and the previous one, to what extent are the Emperor and the Empress distinguished from their guests? Well, the emperor is more distinguished from other participants than the empress, right? He was wearing distinct clothing. Remember? Distinct clothing. And he's the only person seated on one side of the table, right? The emperor and empress might see themselves as hosts and participants, albeit participants with a unique status, if you will. It's just food for thought. Okay, section 3, visual source 3. Oh, this is a great one. A literary gathering. So what marks these figures as cultivated men of literary or scholarly inclination? Well, the scroll held by the man, second from the left. That's a good indicator. Writing materials held by the man on the far right. It's a good indicator. Maybe their poses or their expressions. So what meaning would you attribute to the outdoor garden setting of this image? Well, outdoors is for leisure time, right? For playtime. And that's where it should ideally be spent, especially according to Chinese cultural practice. And contact with nature is supposed to improve scholarly and social pursuits. Remember, Taoism being one with nature, those ideas shaped leisure activities. So, some things to keep in mind. I want you to look at their faces and their gazes of these four figures. What do you think that suggests about the character of the gathering and maybe the relationships among the participants? Just by looking at their facial expressions, they look actively engaged in contemplation as opposed to conversation. Might be for individual reflection as opposed to group interaction, which is very different from the first two visual sources that we saw, right? Very social, very interactive, lots going on, eating, music, right? Well, this is very different. So they're physically gathered as a group, but they're primarily engaged in individual study, it looks like. Okay, and the last image, an elite night party. What kinds of entertainment are featured at this gathering? Music, probably dancing, food, drink, even some sleeping areas. In case they were tired, up late, having a good time, getting together. It's a night party. How are the women portrayed in these images? In what ways are they relating to the men? It looks to me like the women are the entertainers. They're the ones dancing, playing the music. Right, so the women are the entertainers. Servants delivering drinks to the men, companions standing next to the men. So on the far right in the bed alcove, a foot and a leg are protruding from the alcove. Let me rephrase that. On the far right, in the bed alcove, a foot and leg protruding from the alcove may represent, some different activities, and but they do this for a long time and go to sleep. I guess that's probably better than being out in public. Okay, so that sums up China and the world, East Asian connections. It's a very important chapter. I hope you got out of it everything that you wanted to, everything that you needed to. And I will see you again for Chapter 9, The Worlds of Islam. And we'll look at Afro-Eurasian connections in that chapter.